Hello and welcome to the 2023 Train the Director webinar series, a collaboration between the FTCOE and ASCLD. Our first webinar of the four-part series is the State of Standard Development and Tools for Assessing and Implementing Standards. Today's webinar will consist of 3 presentations on national and international standards organizations, followed by a roundtable in which a variety of speakers discuss their personal experiences with standards. Up first, we have Erin Forey, a quality manager with the Boston Police Department Crime Laboratory, presenting Building International Consensus, a glimpse inside the ISO TC 272 on forensic sciences. Take it away, Erin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for participating in this webinar about the state of standards development in forensic science. My name is Erin Forey. I'm chair of the United States Technical Advisory Group, or US TAG. And I'll explain all that in the presentation today. And I'll be sharing with you some information about the development of forensic science standards at ISO, the International Organization of Standardization. Quickly, we have a brief disclaimer that just says the opinions in this presentation are my own. And I just wanted to actually get started today as we're going to talk about the state of standards development, what a standard is in the first place. Standard is really just an agreed way of doing something. It's meant to provide reliable basis for people to share the same expectations about a product or a service, like maybe how to manufacture something, making a product, or how to manage the process or delivery of a service. In most cases, standards are designed for voluntary use, and really they're not meant to make things harder. They're actually offered as ways to do your work better. And it's also worth mentioning that most standards are actually developed by people in the industry who are doing the work. Now, with respect to ISO, it's something that maybe some of you are familiar with. Your lab may be accredited to ISO standards. ISO is the International Organization of Standardization, and it was developed in 1946 when 67 delegates got together from 25 countries, seeing a need to make international standards. Fast forward to 2023, we have 167 countries participating in ISO as members, 810 technical committees, and just under 25,000 standards. So why do we have international standards? These are meant to facilitate exchange of goods and services through the elimination of technical barriers to trade. The standards are ensuring materials, products, processes, services, they're fit for purpose. They're improving economies by improving relationships between businesses, and then improving the daily function of work within your business as well. There are, again, hundreds of technical committees in ISO. So those are the people who are doing the work, making the standards for the industry. Forensics are not unique in standards. I mean, there's a standard that just came out last year for medical technologies and competence and quality. Also one in the minimum requirements for testing for diagnostic testing for SARS-CoV-2, which we know is the virus that contributes to COVID-19. So the technical committee at ISO that is doing the forensic science work is TC number 272. This is managed by Standards Australia. They're serving as the secretariat or the administrators of the TC, and it's under the leadership of Kylie Schumacher and Lindsay Wilson-Wild, who serves as chair, both from Australia. We have 27 participating nations in TC 272 as depicted by this collage of flags, and 19 observing nations. The primary difference between the two here is that participating nations are attending frequent meetings for the technical committee, also participating in votes, and the 19 observing nations are usually just sort of watching what's going on and monitoring the development of forensic science standards. So each country has one membership to ISO, and in some cases this is done by a regulatory body in the country. But in the United States, the representative at ISO is actually ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, which is a nonprofit organization. And they are the United States at ISO. And what they do is they have US tags, which are kind of mirror committees to the technical committee at ISO within the US that are comprised of experts in the particular field associated with that technical committee. And here in the US, the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors, or ASCLD, serves as the administrator and manages the US tag. Again, the tag is the mirror committee to TC 272. So like in TC 272, we have member nations, we have member organizations comprising the US tag. The leadership of the tag are myself as chair, Jody Wolf is the secretariat, and Pam Sale serves as vice chair, and Pam represents ANAB. Both Jody and I are representing ASCLD at the US tag. We have 10 member entities or organizations. That's ASCLD, ANAB, AFQAM, ASB, ASHA, CSAFE, DIFBA, who is the Department of Defense, DOJ, IAI, and NIST. And that's traditional forensic science alphabet soup sometimes, trying to remember all these organizations. But chances are that you're affiliated with one or more of these, and you have people that are representing you in the development of the ISO standards. ANSI serves to accredit us, the US tag, and the primary purpose of the tag is to develop and transmit via ANSI the US consensus position and comments on activities and ballots for the ISO TC. We're also responsible for deciding on the delegates and the experts that will represent the US at ISO committee meetings. And one interesting thing I just want to mention is that here in the US, we have 50 states with slightly different judicial systems. And us as the tag, we have to reach national consensus. Together, all of our 10 organizations, we try to take into account how the standards are going to impact the people at local, state, federal levels, and all of our other stakeholders, because we have one vote, one single vote for the United States. And our European colleagues often comment and recognize how difficult that must be, because each of their nations have one vote, and sometimes they only have one national lab that they're actually representing. So the way that ISO's TC 272 came about was actually the idea of Standards Australia and our Australian colleagues in response to the NAS report. They highlighted the need for standards in forensics and the potential impact this was having on the administration of justice. There were national standards being developed at ASTM, Standards Australia, etc. But they were primarily wanting to pull this together to facilitate information sharing. And it's worth noting that the standards that we're making are not meant to represent 17025 or 17020. They're in a completely different class. So very briefly, let me just go over the primary objectives that we have at TC 272. We're really trying to enhance reliability of forensic evidence, establish consistent work practices, and allow for exchange of information cross-border and among agencies. The process of standards development at ISO is not that much different than it is at other standards development organizations. You come up with a new work item proposal. Sometimes that's a draft of a standard or a published standard that already exists someplace else. And then you go into a working draft where experts and subject matter experts are coming together to create the first round of the draft. It moves on to committee draft where all the member countries can comment, and then to different levels of the draft process. Number 4 is the draft international standard, where we are very near to being published, and that'll be open for public comment. So ISO describes this like a symphony. It takes a lot of people to work together to develop the standard. And ISO sort of serves as the conductor, while the orchestra is made of the technical experts that are nominated by our members. From start to finish, it takes about 3 years to create and publish a standard, but the voting process, that's the key to the consensus. If that's achieved, it's on its way to becoming an ISO standard. But if agreements aren't reached at every stage of the process, the draft will be modified further and it will be voted on again. So far at TC 272, we have published 3 standards. 18385 is regarding the consumables for DNA testing. This actually was the first standard published, and it came up, if you go to this link, there's more information about the history of that. The Phantom of Heidelbronn was an idea that there was a female serial killer in Europe because DNA profiles were being found that were linking different evidentiary items, but it turned out to be an employee of one of the manufacturers of DNA consumables. So there's a standard that has requirements in place to reduce the likelihood of contamination from employees of those manufacturers. Also 21043 parts 1, the terms and definitions, and 2, recognition and collection of items. Those are part of the forensic science series. There's 5 Parts 1 and 2 have been published and are on the OSAC registry, and we're currently working on parts 3, 4, and 5, analysis, interpretation, and reporting. Once the standards are published, they're up for review every 5 years to ensure they're up to date and globally relevant. As we're working on these last 3 parts of this series, the challenges that we face as we're trying to reach consensus are the fact that we have different judicial systems. Some of us have juries, some of us don't. Some of us swear in and take an oath before we testify, some of us don't. All those have to be taken into account. Language is also a challenge. Not everybody is a native speaker, and we have to choose the best words and the best terms for these standards so that they can translate appropriately into other people's languages, and that they can use the standards and understand the meaning of what they're supposed to be asking us to do in whatever language that they're native speakers of. And consensus, reaching national consensus, I already discussed, was a challenge. International consensus is also a challenge because of some of these differences from country to country. And consensus is a group discussion where all views and opinions are heard, not necessarily a unanimous decision or agreement on something, but you're unanimously deciding that you can live with whatever decision is made by the group. It might not be your preference, but it's something that you generally agree upon. Can you live with it? Is sort of what our ultimate question is. This is often carries around something with shoulds and shalls. That's usually where we end up with a lot of really interesting discussion. So again, the primary standards that we have out there are 18385, which is something that your labs may be reviewing when you're doing a risk assessment, choosing whether or not you're going to purchase a supply from a particular manufacturer. And 21043 is on the registry. This is not part of an accreditation program. This is something that you would self-declare. And you can expect to see parts 3, 4, and 5 published in 2024. This will also be available for public comment, I would guess, by the end of this calendar year, I think. Now, how can you get involved? Again, we have 10 member organizations here in the US TAG, and chances are pretty good that you're either a member or affiliated with one of them. I encourage you to either reach out to the president of one of these organizations or to myself, Jody Wolf, or Executive Director of ASCLD, John Bird, if you're looking for more information on who to contact. And if your organization is interested in learning how to become a member of the TAG, you can contact any of us as well. Once we do publish the rest of the series, parts 3, 4, and 5, we may be moving on to other standards. There's been blood alcohol has been something that we have been discussing as a potential international standard as well. So stay tuned for more information on our future directions. And let's see, I just wanted to acknowledge that ASCLD for their management and administration of the US TAG, also my colleagues at NIJ, FTCOE, RTI, and NIST, and the US TAG and ISO TC 272 colleagues, some of which are shown in this picture from our last meeting this past October in Copenhagen. We plan to meet again in the springtime in June in England. Also thank the Boston Police Department, my employer, for their support in me participating in this project, and my contact information is here for you as well, should you like to get a hold of me with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Our second presenter is Teresa Ambrosius, Secretariat of the Academy Standards Board, presenting A Brief History and Status of the ASB and Forensic Standards.
Hi, my name is Teresa Ambrosius, and I'm the Secretariat of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences Standards Board, the ASB, and today I'll be giving you a brief introduction to the ASB. As part of the Academy's ongoing mission to provide leadership in forensics and its application to the legal system, the Academy responded to the diverse forensic community to provide a forum for addressing the needs of quality assurance through standardization. The ASB is the standards developing organization of the AAFS and was established and staffed in 2015 and 2016 and accredited by the American National Standards Institute in December of 2015. The ASB currently has 14 active consensus bodies, with the recent addition of the Forensic Odontology Consensus Body to the ASB. Currently, the ASB and the AAFS are working closely with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, on a cooperative agreement. This agreement does provide funds to the AAFS to develop training, tools, and resources. Through this cooperative agreement, the Academy is working on significant outreach efforts and engagement with other professional organizations and standards developing organizations, along with many other partners. One of the primary governing documents of the ASB is the Academy Standards Board Procedures for the Development of American National Standards. This is the document that is accredited by the American National Standards Institute and provides all of the information on how our standards are developed. It also includes the responsibilities of the ASB board, staff, and consensus bodies, and sets the process for our standards development. It also contains the ANSI-approved interest categories. If you are interested in viewing this document, it is posted on the Documents and Forms page of the ASB website. Part of our accreditation with the American National Standards Institute is that within each consensus body, we have 7 ANSI-approved interest categories. The ASB strives to have no more than 33% of any interest category represented on any consensus body. In the ASB's 14 consensus bodies, we have from 7 to 25 voting members on each one. They're administered with the Secretariat, myself, and the officers of the consensus body. They're open to all materially interested and affected individuals, companies, and organizations. There are applications. We open up the application period about once a year, and the members are appointed by the Academy Standards Board members. Our membership balance and interest categories, like I previously mentioned, conform to the ANSI essential requirements for balance, lack of dominance, and due process. We do have over 300 industry volunteers on our ASB consensus bodies and working groups. The functions of the consensus bodies are to develop and approve the ASB standards and documents. The consensus bodies also consider all comments, views, and objections, and resolve all comments received in connection with the development of documents. Consensus bodies also respond to requests for interpretation on published documents. Our consensus body meetings are open to the public, and the meetings are posted on the public calendar on the ASB website. Under our consensus bodies, we have working groups. Pretty much every single document that we have in the development process has its own working group. These groups are subsets of the consensus bodies. They usually have about 5 to 8 people. These meetings are not open, but we do often have members of our working groups who are not voting members of our consensus bodies. For instance, if there is a topic of a document that we need special expertise on, the consensus body and the working group officers will reach out to specific people to bring them onto the working groups. Another governing document of the ASB is our manual and style guide for ASB standards, guidelines, best practice recommendations, and technical reports. This document is used by all of our working groups to prepare the draft documents to be presented to the consensus bodies. We utilize this document to ensure consistency in format and to maximize usability of the documents. This is also a document that can be downloaded from our website on the Documents and Forms page. Within that document, we list the 4 types of documents that we publish. We have standards, guidelines, best practice recommendations, and technical reports. All of our standards, guidelines, and best practice recommendations are put through the full ANSI American National Standards process. Our technical reports do still follow the process, but are not at the end of the day approved by ANSI as an American National Standard. The ASB has a strong collaborative relationship with the Organization of Scientific Area Committees for Forensic Science, or OSAC, out of NIST. Most of our documents have started with the draft developed within OSAC. Please remember that OSAC is not a standards developing organization. They have subcommittees that develop documents which are then put forward to different standards developing organizations. We are one of quite a few organizations that works with OSAC and works on the draft documents that they develop. Our documents may also be created within the ASB or submitted from other sources. But at the end of the day, the ASB consensus body is ultimately responsible for the documents, and they are responsible for approving the content of the documents. The document process follows ANSI accredited procedures. This is a very simplified version of what the documents go through. We have a new work proposal, which is submitted to the ASB, whether through a consensus body or through OSAC or through another group. That is approved, and we do announce that through the ANSI process and through the ANSI Standards Action publication that we will begin work on that document. Then a work group generally works on that document and finalizes it, presents it to the consensus body for release for public comment. The document is given public review and voted on by the consensus body members. And then the working group and consensus bodies work to adjudicate all comments. If the document has any technical or significant modifications, the document will be recirculated and go back through the public comment and ballot process as many times as is needed until there are no additional technical or significant changes. And at that point in time, the paperwork and all of the proof of comment adjudication and ballot results are presented to ANSI to move forward as an American national standard. The ballot and public comment period is one of the most central part of the standards development process. All of our documents out for public comment are posted on the ASB website for a 45-day public comment period. We do run a 30-day ballot period for the consensus body concurrently with that 45-day public comment period. We do encourage all members of the public that are involved in the forensic industry and have a material interest in any of our documents to participate in that public comment period. In order to hear about our documents out for public comment, you can subscribe to the ASB newsletter by sending an email to asb@aafs.org. And through that, every Friday, we send out a newsletter with an announcement of any documents out for public comment or any newly published documents or any documents that we are going to begin work on. Our consensus bodies vote on the documents, and they may vote yes, yes with comment, no with comment, or abstain with comment. At the end of the day, our ASB procedures approved by ANSI require a 2/3 majority excluding abstentions in order for us to publish a document. When comments come in from both consensus body ballot and public comments, they are presented to the working group. All comments, no matter who is submitting them, are given the same consideration and must all be resolved by the working group. And then those comment resolutions are presented to the consensus body for approval. And as I previously mentioned, if documents have substantial or technical changes based on the comments, the document will go up for recirculation. But at this point in time, comments can only be made on revised sections of the documents. Currently, the ASB has 80 published standards and best practice recommendations and 4 technical reports. We've received over 190 new work proposals, and many of those documents are currently being worked on by our consensus bodies. As I mentioned previously, if you would like to subscribe to the ASB newsletter, please send an email to asb@aafs.org. If you have any additional questions about the ASB, you can visit our website or send me an email. And please also join our LinkedIn site for any additional information on the ASB. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teresa. Our third presenter is Dr. Ray Wickenheiser, Director of the New York State Police Crime Laboratory System, presenting OSAC Registry Standards Implementation Update and New York State Police OSAC Standards Implementation Experience.
Thank you for the invitation to speak at the American Society of Crime Lab Directors Train the Director series, the state of standard development and tools for assessing and implementing standards. My name is Ray Wickenheiser. I'm the Director of New York State Police Crime Laboratory System. And today I'm going to talk about the OSAC Registry Standards implementation, provide an update, and talk about what we've done here in New York State Police Crime Lab System with our implementation, what our experience has been. So first, I'd like to provide a snapshot of where we are with standards on the OSAC registry and our standards development process. As the ASCLD representative to the OSAC, I currently serve on the Forensic Science Standards Board, and I'm currently the chair. So what we've done to date is there's 133 standards on the OSAC registry, which is the highest level of vetting. These have been approved by the FSSB and the OSAC, and those are available on the website. So please check that out. There's a further 51 standards that have completed the Standards Development Organization consensus process and are eligible for the registry. Another 116 standards that are currently at an SDO and that have been drafted from the OSAC subcommittees with input by the OSAC resource task groups, which are legal, statistics, quality assurance, and human factors. And there's another 170 standards that are under development or being currently drafted. And if you total that, it's over 470 different work products. So quite a number of standards and work products that are in the pipeline. Of those 133 standards, 97 have been published by SDOs. There's another 36 which are proposed standards. So the point of those proposed standards are to give forensic science service providers an opportunity to see those proposed standards, provide input, try them out, and really be informed by use. So we've encouraged a number of the subcommittees to put those forward as proposed standards so you get a chance to look at them, see them, and kick the tires, so to speak. So there's a breakdown. We have a total of 22 different subcommittees in the various scientific areas. And here's a look at where those standards are in terms of the publication of them and the proposed standards. We've also conducted 2 different surveys, and the first survey was completed in 2021. The detailed report has been released and is available on the NIST OSAC website, so please check that out. There was a total of 155 responses received, and within those 155, there's 138 forensic science service providers which reported full or partial standards implementation. The second survey went out this last summer. We will be producing a detailed report in February. 177 responses were received there, and of those 177, 128 reported full or partial implementation. So these may very well be a large number of different forensic science service providers. So we're looking at going probably to this next year with potentially an open season model where we have a focused time over 3 months through summer, where we will encourage existing implementers to update their declarations during that time, and it serves to drive to bring on new implementers. So we're working on it, and that may be one way we will go as opposed to having another implementation survey next year. So next is to give you a look of which are the top 10 implemented published standards. Our most implemented standards, not surprisingly, is the overarching ISO standard 17025 2017 version. Closely behind that is our training standard, followed by 2 of the seized drug standards. So look at the top implemented standards. And as you can appreciate, as you go down the list, more detailed standards will be more specific to individual sections or labs that have those sections. In late 2021, NIST and American Academy of Forensic Science entered into a cooperative agreement. The basis of that cooperative agreement was the use of high-quality, technically sound standards, promoting that. The American Academy developed training tools, tools for implementation, and resources to enhance our implementation efforts, as well as broadening awareness of forensic science standards. These training tools and resources will be available free to OSAC members and members of the public. So the first tool I'd like to talk about are 1-page fact sheets. And in those fact sheets, as you can appreciate, many of these standards are pretty dense with scientific material. They're really written for a scientific audience. So the fact sheet is to make understandable to the layperson what is the purpose of the standard, why it's important, the benefits of adopting the standard, how it's used, and the key elements of the standard itself. So currently there's 48 fact sheets that are available. They're available for 3 SDOs in 13 different disciplines, and more being added each month, particularly as new standards are going on the registry. The next tool are checklists. And essentially what these checklists are very closely mirroring the standards and act as essentially a checklist to check, are you implementing this particular standard? Is it implemented? Where are you with implementation? and it assists you to identify gaps and impediments to implementation. They allow you to track your process as well as what the barriers might be. They're in a standardized format in Excel, which helps you to facilitate data extraction. These have been developed collaboratively. Our lab was one of the beta labs who gave them a try. There's currently 57 checklists that are available in a total of 14 disciplines, and these are being added every month as standards are added to the registry. Additional initiatives that the American Academy has undertaken as part of that agreement with NIST is training and webinars. So standards-related videos and webinar activities were presented at the American Academy 2022 annual meeting this last year, and those are available on demand. There's also quite a number of standards-related activities, including workshops at the American Academy of Forensic Science meeting coming up this February in 2023. So this year, can't believe it's already 2023, and that will be held in Florida. So I certainly encourage you to attend those. If you're not able to attend, please check out the online version because really this is folks who've been developing standards themselves, who've been implementing them in their labs, and they'll be available to not only share their experiences, tools and tricks, so to speak, in terms of how they implemented it, acting as mentors, and really the process of labs helping labs in terms of assisting with their implementation. So moving forward, we want to increase awareness of standards on the OSAC registry and the development of consensus-based standards in forensic science. We're providing these tools through training, the tools themselves and resources, which will be publicly available. They're being available for multiple standards developing organizations, and new fact sheets and checklists are being developed every month as new standards are being added to the registry. So please check back often. And that's the NIST OSAC website, as well as the American Academy of Forensic Science website. So talking about a little bit about our experience in New York State. As you may be aware, New York State has the New York Commission on Forensic Science that oversees the 20 crime labs in the state. We are required to be accredited. The chosen accrediting body is AAFS, and our standard is the overarching ISO 17025 2017 version, as well as if you're a DNA lab adhering to the FBI QAS. So for us, standards are not coming near here, but certainly for everyone in the forensic discipline, we all know that everyone is aware of these standards, or increasingly the defense community, the media, if you have a commission, they're aware. So we really conducted a risk assessment in terms of we're going to be asked the question, really, what's our better answer? So if you look at the options, you get asked, where are you with standards implementation? First option, essentially, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not aware of standards. Next option, I've heard of standards, haven't done anything yet with them yet, haven't implemented. Next option, we're aware of standards, we don't have the time nor the resources. And sort of moving up the chain, so to speak, in terms of what maybe a better answer would be. Option 4, we're aware of standards, are in the process of reviewing them, performing a gap analysis, and implementing them. And finally, option 5, perhaps ideal response. We have fully implemented some standards, are in the process of implementing others. So looking at a risk analysis, certainly the closer to option 4 or 5 is going to be probably a better answer. So it's a place that we wanted to be. So what we did is began our implementation, and the next slide is giving you a little bit of a visual in terms of our process of getting off the couch to running a 5K as a metaphor for implementing standards. So if the answer was going to be not aware of standards, essentially with respect to standards themselves, we're sleeping on the couch. So being aware of standards, reading the standards, we're aware of them, reading them, and then at some point we start to get moving. Are we going to do some implementation? So we're moving towards implementation. We don't have a particular timeline, but then enter, if you're going to be an implementer, wouldn't it be better to have these tools to assist you? Enter something like a treadmill, assisting you in terms of your workout routine, and you can achieve that 5K. Then once you get there, now you've achieved this level of fitness, wouldn't it be better to keep it going, continue to develop those implementation of best practice muscles and eventually become a champion yourself. So really that's kind of that metaphor for where we're going, Couch to 5K, and eventually being a lab that can be a mentor and assist other labs in terms of their implementation efforts. So what we did, first read the standards, provide that input where necessary, and it helps you really to identify gaps. So the various three things that can happen is, one, the standard component has issues. Will you provide feedback? Second possibility is you see where you can make some change. Will you make that change, or you're actually adhering to that standard, you check your box. Or three, you need something in order to make the change, you need resources. So by having that checklist or having a standard you need to adhere to, it gives you that opportunity to help make the argument for additional resources, because it's besides saying, I'm interested in getting this piece of equipment, or I need this piece of equipment in order to adhere to the standard. It's a better answer. It's a better argument. And then also recognizing that standards will improve with use and experience. The more crime labs that can get involved, provide that feedback experience. The standards are a 5-year life cycle. Everything is about continuous improvement. It really is an opportunity to help the whole process as well as labs adopt best practices. So that concludes my talk. I really want to thank you for your kind attention. And here's my contact information. If you need to give me a call, shoot me an email. I'd love to talk to you about anything I've said here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. We will now move on to our roundtable panelist presentations. Up first, we have Eva M.L. King, Quality Assurance Director of Wisconsin State Crime Laboratories.
Welcome to Wisconsin. Here in Wisconsin, we are OSAC implementers, where our vision is to search for the truth through science and to lead and shape the advancement of forensic science. Our mission here is to promote excellence in analysis, training, and service to the community, and our organization with integrity and uncompromising quality. Here in Wisconsin, we began as 3 separate laboratories and became a crime laboratory bureau early in the 2000s. And we moved on from a bureau to an actual division. However, prior to that time, when we were a crime laboratory bureau, I attended the AFQAM 13th Annual Training Conference, the Association of Forensic Quality Assurance Managers training conference in Vancouver, British Columbia, where Mark Stollerol actually presented information on OSAC. He also provided information on the direction that we were headed at a national level. Providing that information, keeping in contact with updated information with OSAC, you can take a look at the OSAC newsletter, May 2021, the spring edition, where it describes the Wisconsin path, the journey, and our way forward. In the summer of 2021, the OSAC newsletter actually reported on Wisconsin's media announcements. Now, we moved on from our crime laboratory bureau with our 3 laboratories that came together because, of course, we work better and stronger together than separate. So as we moved forward, we became a division. And with the division, we had new leadership. That leadership included our division administrator, Nicole Ream, and our deputy administrator, Jennifer Nago. Nikki and Jen were great supporters of implementing the vision of partnership with OSAC. Under the direction of Nicole Ream, our 3 separate laboratories that became a single crime laboratory bureau, now under the division, each laboratory is its own bureau. We've expanded and we actually have a quality assurance bureau. Under the Quality Assurance Bureau, discussions began with strengthening that partnership with OSAC. And so as we moved on, we continued to attend conferences where we were updated on information about OSAC and all of the different initiatives through OSAC NIST, as well as how we could participate With all of our separate disciplines within our laboratories, we highly encouraged our staff to participate in OSAC, to review standards as they move forth. And also within the Quality Assurance Bureau, we were very proactive in moving our quality statement from one that did not include information about OSAC to one that actually includes OSAC in our quality statement, where it now reads the addition of using and supporting technically sound standards and guidelines of the OSAC. In the Quality Assurance Bureau, where I'm the director, the focus was to take a team approach on conquering implementation of the OSAC standards. And how did we do that? Well, each of the disciplines that we have present at the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory were equipped with technical leaders. The technical leaders were charged with taking information about the OSAC to their respective disciplines, to their respective units. Each of the technical leaders provided their units with information regarding everything that was on the OSAC website. That was our biggest tool that we used in looking for information regarding our policies and procedures compared to the OSAC standards. As we continue to review OSAC standards and review our policies and procedures, our staff was encouraged to participate as OSAC members, affiliates, and we did have participation by some of our technical leaders, and some of our technical leaders even received commendation or just great appreciation from the OSAC for their participation, and we're very proud of that. Now, as we continue to compare our procedures and what we were working on with the OSAC standards, we definitely had many questions for which we posed to OSAC, and we would reach out to OSAC and participate in surveys, as well as continue to utilize the website as best we could. And in so doing, seized drugs, forensic imaging, footwear, now friction bridge, as well as toxicology, led us to a point where we are OSAC implementers. We're very proud and very happy to be OSAC implementers because we definitely understand the need for consistencies in the forensic science throughout our nation and this world. And as a participant, we explain our journey, as I once said, and you can take a look there. And here is the actual article that you can pull up. Wisconsin State Crime Laboratories move forward with implemented OSAC standards. Do take a look at that article, which gives you information on how we divided and conquered, placing the technical leaders with authority to work with their technical units to look at all of the tools that OSAC has available. The website tools, the information, when things go up for public comment, encouraging participation in that. We needed everyone participating and providing information in order to have moved us to a point where we can say that we are participating in as an OSAC implementer, where together everyone has achieved more. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Up next is Peter Stout, CEO and President of Houston Forensic Science Center.
Hi, I'm Peter Stout. I am the head nerd of the Houston Forensic Science Center, which is the crime lab that serves the city of Houston. We are accredited across all of our disciplines to ISO 17025. And I've got two different ways that I talk about accreditation a lot with various stakeholders. Maybe these could be useful to people as they think about it, or maybe they could be useful to you if you're trying to explain to those that you have to justify budgets to about standards and accreditation and standard adoption. A couple of ways I try to get people to think about it is laboratories are an enormous source of risk. Here in Houston, there's a convenient way that I talk about it because George Rodriguez was an exoneree here in Houston who served 17 years for a sexual assault he didn't commit based off of very clearly a laboratory error. In the sum total of all of the findings and remuneration that he had from that wrongful conviction was about $7 million. So when I look at our laboratory processes, roughly 30 to 35,000 requests a year, a straight line calculation of the amount of risk that our laboratory represents in 1 year is something in the range of about $200 billion. Standards accreditation are part of how we mitigate this. I also point out, for those that point out that standards just get in the way of getting stuff out the door, yes, there is also a risk associated with laboratories being late, and this is the rock and the hard place that labs sit between all the time. So I use this study here that tries to estimate the cost of various crimes, and this is just one way to look at it. But they estimate that a sexual assault is about $500,000. Can guarantee you, if you were the victim of that sexual assault, you don't think it was worth $500,000, but that's what they estimate the cost to the society is. Here in Houston, we get about 1,200 sexual assault kits a year. So that probably represents something in the neighborhood of 15,000 sexual assaults in Houston every year, given kind of estimates of how often a sexual assault kit actually gets collected in a sexual assault. Meaning, if there are 57 sexual assaults that we head off because we get a result out the door in a timely fashion that allows for somebody to be arrested, that's more than the budget of the laboratory. So trying to put standards between these two things of standards have to be efficient, but standards help mitigate the very real cost. This is expensive work to do, but it's even more expensive work to screw up. Another way I try to get people to look at this, and conveniently, again, here in Houston, I can tell almost any story here in headlines that we've been in. This was a huge industrial accident that happened just before the pandemic. Place exploded, blew up multiple square miles. Lots of damage in the neighborhood. A couple of people were killed out of it. We didn't know if it was an industrial accident or malfeasance when it first went off, so our crime scene unit was out there. And I was out there with them when they did this. And Gessner Road that runs just along the side, this happened at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, which was good because Gessner Road is a big commute thoroughfare. And had this happened a little bit later, we would have had hundreds of people killed because there was high velocity shrapnel that clearly went across the road and into the fences on the other side. But I was also looking around at this, and right over here in this building, I noticed something that made me think about standards and accreditation, because this company was proudly flying their accredited to ISO 9001 in part of the exploded up area. So I put this as a bookend to standards and accreditation are always a minimum. Doing this work is expensive. Screwing this work up is even more expensive. But standards don't necessarily mean this is an end-all and be-all. And I've heard this a lot of places that we're accredited, we follow standards, we're good. No, it's a minimum. And you can be accredited, follow standards, still blow up the neighborhood and kill people. So I've got all kinds of stories and ways I can look at standards and accreditation, but those are probably the two kind of bookends of how I try to describe these things to people that I'm trying to convince need to provide enough money to do this work right. Hope that helps people out a little bit.
Thank you, Peter. Now we will hear from Jody Wolf, Crime Lab Administrator with the Phoenix Police Department Laboratory Services Bureau.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the Phoenix Police Department's Crime Laboratory's adoption of the OSAC standards. And we actually use a tool called Qualtrics for all of our document control and management. And we chose to use that as well to review our OSAC standards. And so Our quality assurance unit is responsible for Qualtrics, so it made sense for them to be also responsible for managing the overview and the review of the upcoming and outgoing OSAC standards. So that's what they've done. They'll monitor the registry, and when applicable standards are added, they will send a workflow via Qualtrics to the applicable subject matter expert, which is typically the unit supervisor, to review the OSAC standard and then complete the Qualtrics workflow, which I'll show you in just a few minutes, to demonstrate what we're doing with that standard. So the reviewer records that adoption and documents whether we're going to incorporate it or what type of incorporation we're going to use with that standard, or if we're not going to incorporate it. We can adopt the use of the standard on a standalone basis or modify the SOP to be in compliance with it. Our goal is to make sure that all adoptions are incorporated into an SOP. So when the supervisor reviews the standard and says, yes, we're going to incorporate it, then within a timely manner, they'll make any applicable revisions to SOPs. What we found actually often is that our SOPs are already in compliance with most of the standards, so we've had minimal impact to SOP revisions. But if that is a concern, then the supervisor has the ability to document that within the Qualtrics workflow. And one of the benefits of using Qualtrics to do it is we can run reports out of it. We can run management reports. We can see how many standards we have reviewed, how many have been adopted, in what sections, and so forth. And I'll show you an example of that here in just a few minutes. So here's a screenshot of what the initial workflow will look like. As I mentioned, our QA team will send this to the applicable supervisor, depending on the standard that we're reviewing. And then the supervisor will make an evaluation summary, and they have these options essentially to record when they're doing that review of that standard. So it may be not applicable, and we will have some standards that aren't going to be applicable to our operations. They may decide they don't know what they're going to do with it, and they want to talk to their team or get some additional information. We will implement it either partially or fully. We have already implemented it either partially or fully. We intend to implement, but it's dependent on the acquisition of new equipment or something like that. And we will use or we will not implement. So dependent on what choice the supervisor makes, the Qualtrics workflow will bring up a list of questions that asks them, if it's a partial implementation, what was not adopted? Why didn't you adopt the whole thing? And what is required for adoption? So let's say that we're not going to implement it, but why? Often for us, I think it tends to be instrumentation or equipment limiting, which requires capital funds typically to be able to move forward with. But I'm happy to say that that's a pretty rare occurrence for our laboratory. We also have to document reasons that something may not be applicable or not adopted. Essentially, we want to create that audit trail of the review of the standard, what we've done with it, why we're doing it, either in favor or not in favor, and what we need if we do want to adopt it going forward. So for us, this is that report that I mentioned earlier. It ends up being exportable as an Excel spreadsheet. We can document over here on the left side. You can see the standards that we have reviewed, what discipline it applies to, what we're going to do with it, the summary, where we're at with it, whether it's still in process or we've completed it, what we're already doing with it, and so on. So it really allows us to be able to create that audit trail and understand where we're at. So for our laboratory, as of right now, these stats are current. We've reviewed 73 standards, have been sent for review. 40 are or will be fully or partially incorporated as defined in the SOP and meets the SOP requirements. Partial adoption requires a statement of the aspects that have not been adopted. So we want to be really clear and transparent about if it's a partial implementation, what part of the standard requirements were not adopted and the reasons for it. This really helps us for our strategic planning in the future to identify those things or resources that we may need in order to be able to fully adopt any particular OSAC standard. 5 were evaluated as suitable for future adoption and incorporation, but pended. 3 were found to be not applicable. 5 were applicable, but we will not incorporate. 2 will be used as references only, and 19 are currently in the review process. So that includes standards that are up for re-review after being pended. And this is just one tool that laboratories can use that we have found successful for us. We do use Qualtrics, as I mentioned, for all of our document retention, our records, our SOPs, our quality system, and our accreditation activities. So for us, it's been very successful, but it's not the only way to be able to track how you adopt those standards and what sort of actions you're taking associated with them. So with that, I wish you all the best of luck, and I'll turn it over to the next person.
Thank you, Jody. Our final roundtable panelist is Rita Newman, Laboratory Director of the Pinellas County Forensic Laboratory.
Good afternoon. My name is Rita Newman. I am the director of the Pinellas County Forensic Laboratory in Largo, Florida. I was asked to discuss the implementation process used at our laboratory for the OSAC Registry of Standards. Let's start with just a brief background about our laboratory. We are a division of the District 6 Medical Examiner's Office. We represent Pinellas and Pasco counties. The population is about 1.4 million. We're in the Tampa Bay area, Clearwater, and St. Petersburg. The services provided in the laboratory include seized drug analysis, postmortem and human performance toxicology, fire debris analysis, and DNA. So we do have a limited scope of analysis at the laboratory. We have a staff of 35 that includes 27 analysts and laboratory technicians. All analysts that are qualified are required to be certified by the American Board of Criminalistics or the American Board of Forensic Toxicology. We are accredited, of course, to ISO 17025, and we are an OSAC registry implementer. Of the current 133 registry documents, both standards and OSAC proposed standards, 41 of those are applicable to our laboratory operations. We created an OSAC registry team. This consists of one subject matter expert from each discipline. They are all either internal auditors or A&AB technical assessors. So they're tasked with monitoring the registry for new additions. There was a new document uploaded actually just yesterday to the registry. They'll be looking at that next week. They evaluate each document and provide a risk assessment for implementation, partial implementation, or non-implementation. So the question, I guess, would be, why would you have a non-implementation of an OSAC registry document? And an example of that for us would be the OSAC proposed document for guidelines for performing alcohol calculations in forensic toxicology, because we know that the SDO, ASB is in the process of revamping that document, and it will eventually come back to the registry for approval as a non-proposed document, as an actual document in a different form. We're having some pretty serious conversations on whether we're going to implement it in its current version at all. So this group is also tasked with performing an audit and a gap analysis against each document, evaluating the risk of compliance and non-compliance for recommendations in the document as opposed to requirements within the document. For making recommendations to our quality manager and our quality assurance committee for minor policy changes, and to provide assessments to the laboratory technical leaders on analytical changes that may be necessary to become in full compliance. Initially, we created our own checklist to do our conformance files for each document. Now there's an excellent tool that is provided by the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. These checklists have been already developed. These are free and are available on the Academy website. So they actually break down each of the requirements line by line and detail whether they're a requirement, whether they're a recommendation, etc., and include the wording for each of those. This has been a very valuable document that we're using now to do our gap analysis and our risk assessment for the different documents. In terms of timelines for implementation, we were fully compliant or only required minor changes for many or even most of the documents. However, there are some documents where full implementation is going to take several years. This is based on resources, staff, equipment, funding. These are all analytical documents, analytical methods. And these documents are assigned to a project team of subject matter experts, typically the technical leader and other members of their unit. And then they develop their own project plans for implementation. So a good example of this scenario are the 3 standards from ANSI ASB for analytical scope and sensitivity for forensic toxicology testing for medical legal death investigations, drug facilitated crime investigations, and impaired driving investigations. These documents are pretty much groundbreaking, and they're necessary and I think very important, but they're not something that we are fully compliant with at this time. For example, if we look at the drug facilitated crime investigations, the limit of reporting for, and this is in urine, for nordazepam, diazepam, temazepam are all 10 nanograms per milliliter in the document, but our current limit is 20. And that goes on for all of the documents where there's a number of analytes where we have a different cutoff that is above the minimum defined by the standards. And it's going to take years to get all of those analytes in the scope at those levels fully validated. That's going to require new calibration curves, new method development if our current methods can't go to some of these levels. So it's going to involve a lot of time, money, and resources. So for our declaration to OSAC on our implementation of those standards, those particular standards are going to be partially implemented for a number of years. We accept that it's a process. The developing the standards themselves through OSAC was a process. Some of those standards took 5-6 years to develop and make it all the way through to the registry. And it's going to be a process, a continual process for us to come into compliance and to take all those steps to be fully compliant with each document. And we recognize that and we appreciate it. So that's the method that we use at our laboratory to monitor and implement OSAC registry standards. If there's any questions, I think that's going to be handled at the end of the presentations. So I'm going to turn it back over to our moderator now.
Thank you, presenters and roundtable participants. We are now going to move on to our Q&A moderated by RTI's John Grassel. Over to you, John.
Hello, I'm John Grassel from RTI. I wanted to thank all of our presenters and panelists for providing such informative talks. And we are now going to begin the Q&A session. First question will be for Erin. Erin, once the current standards that TC 272 are published, will the US tag shut down or will it continue?
Good question. It will continue. Once the tag is just sort of like a group that's been established to represent forensics here in the US through ANSI into ISO. So as long as the technical committee is continuing to make standards at ISO, we'll continue to participate in that. And as we wrap up this set of standards, I know that the technical committee has already started to discuss what could be next. And I think I briefly mentioned in the presentation that there's one nation that's really interested in a blood alcohol standard, in particular to address pilots. So that was sort of their foundation for why they think it's really important. So we'll hopefully have more information in the next 6 months or so as to what's to come.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question is for Teresa. Teresa, what is the process for incorporating the changes into an existing standard?
So once we have a standard published, there are 3 different options for incorporating changes. If they are simple editorial changes, we can work with the consensus body and issue something called an errata and update the document. If the document needs some changes, we can issue something called an addendum. To issue an addendum, it still needs to go through the same process of announcing that we're working on it. It needs to have ballots. It needs to have 2/3 approval by the consensus body, and it will need to go out for public comment. But that's usually if perhaps maybe just an annex is to be added or something like that. Once a document is ready for a full revision, then the consensus body will start working on a second or third or whatever appropriate edition of the document, and it goes through the same process that the first edition of a document goes through, which is again, the document will go out for public comment. The consensus body will have ballots on it. All comments are resolved by the consensus body, most likely with a recirculation. Again, with public comment and ballots until the document is ready to be published.
Thank you, Teresa. Ray, this next question is for you, and I'm sure it's one that a lot of labs are considering as well. Are there plans, or are there currently plans when standards are developed that facilitate the transition of new technologies into laboratories, but still allow the laboratories to maintain a high quality of work?
That's a great question. Thank you, John. So my answer would be, for any new technology, we have a number of overarching standards that apply to those. Most pertinent would be ISO 17025, but also general standards that we have for which would address validation, also training, such things as proficiency testing. How would you bring in new technology? And I think the general overarching standards would apply to anything that you want to bring in to demonstrate that it's fit for purpose. We're also working on more specific standards, but as you can appreciate, you probably need a little more experience with actually having that new technology working to then come up with even more specific guidelines. But certainly, I feel that you would want to bring in a new technology with an existing system to provide that good basic quality, so you can get it rolling and have a successful introduction into your casework and into the court system.
Great, thank you, Ray. Eva, first, well, congratulations on sharing your certificate of compliance with OSAC standards. And this question is for you. You stated that you looked at your policies and procedures and aligned them with OSAC standards. That must have been a pretty detailed process, we could imagine. Could you elaborate on it and what it entailed? Eva, I think you may be muted.
Thank you. Wisconsin, as an ISO 17025-2017 accredited laboratory, we recognized very early in the process that OSAC standards and Wisconsin technical practices aligned very well. And to begin our partnership, we actually moved on becoming implementers to those standards that we already practice as full implementers. And in that process, we saw the opportunity to become partial implementers as well and move to declare those OSAC standards also. Now we're at a place where good OSAC standards information comes forth, and we actually implement those and also change our manuals, policies, and procedures to actually get those updated to accommodate compliance to those standards within each of the specific units.
Thank you, Eva. Jody, what would you say are the most common reasons for a forensic science service provider for not adopting a standard?
I think some of the biggest barriers or some of the hardest milestones that we need to overcome as laboratories are those that involve time and resources, right? I think several of us have already mentioned it here in our discussions already, that those are probably our biggest barriers. Time, which includes resources, and resources include people. So you have to have people, you have to have the right equipment, and you have to have the opportunity to be able to develop those analytical methods or procedures and practices that allow you to be compliant with the OSAC standards. I also think that most of us who have been actively involved in accreditation and quality system practices, which are most of us, I would presume, have had very few instances in which those have become really limiting factors for us in being able to adopt either partially or in full OSAC standards. Those standards that require new instrumentation, which are capital equipment purchases for our organizations, those are probably the biggest hurdles, because we're not talking about a few $1,000s, we're talking several $100,000. And if we want to have the capacity to do that, maybe it's 2 or 3 of those instruments. Completing the procurement process, the validation, the training, and making them operational is not something that happens overnight. And I know I'm sort of preaching to the choir on this, not telling you all probably something that you didn't already know, but maybe validating that it's not likely that you're going to be able to adopt everything fully right out of the gate. It's going to be a process, just like it is with our accreditation programs. When we started our accreditation, as those accreditation standards, quality standards, and our programs have evolved over time, those standards have also evolved, and we've had to grow with them. So it's going to be very mirror that process very, very much, in my opinion. that we have to have a place to start. We have to do that gap analysis that I think Ray mentioned. We have lots of tools that several of us have talked about, and then put into place those processes that allow us to continue to grow to achieve that full adoption of those standards as applicable for the services that we provide in our laboratories.
Thank you so much, Jody. And that question kind of parlays into Rita. Well, first, Rita, thank you for also sharing your certificate of adoption. Could you describe the impact of resource costs on the implementation plans and the timeline that you had to go through for your agency?
Well, just like Jody said, the costs in both time and people and equipment is the biggest issue. We have been pretty lucky with getting some resources through the Coverdale grant. We were able to double the number of LCMSs we have in our toxicology unit, which means we went from 1 to 2. But that's going to allow us to do those validations that we need to get done to comply with those documents I actually talked about in the presentation. And it's also good justification for when we're going before the board to request money in our budget for our capital. These are the standards. These are standards we're going to be held to. These are standards we're eventually going to be impeached against. We need to get this funding so that we have the resources to move forward. So it's a double-edged sword in that it is going to cost time, people, and money, but on the other hand, it gives us justification to get more people and money.
Thank you, Rita. Peter, this next one I'm going to send your way. It may be difficult, but I think it's on a lot of minds. Can you address testimonial standards? The technical standards are mostly an internal process, but if we want our results to be accepted as evidence, increasingly, especially in things like fingerprints and tool marks, the questioner asks, courts are being asked for testimonial standards.
Yeah, that one's not an easy topic. And I guess we've had here in Texas, we've had a lot of conversations that probably run up to that, because we've talked with, so Texas has a commission. There is a statutory requirement in Texas for laboratories to be accredited. There's also a statutory requirement for analysts, at least in what we call the in-scope disciplines, to be licensed. So at least for firearms toxicology, DNA, trace, seized drugs analysis, those analysts, there is a lever and a mechanism in there to start edging towards basically a testimonial standard that's going to apply to individuals. I think that's going to be part of the trick with some kind of testimonial standard, is that's not just simply an accreditation thing, because the lab is not there testifying on the stand. I guess unless you're, what is it? Denmark is the one that's got, they all testify on behalf of the laboratory and not as the individual analyst. But I mean, it's an individual analyst that's there on the stand. It's the individual analysts that's, all right, in Texas, we say voir dire, is voir dired. So, it's not the same thing for a standard around testimony that's an accreditation standard. There's got to be some kind of hook into licensure standards. There's got to be some kind of hook into certification, because it's the individual analyst. Now, I think all of us struggle with how to best prepare analysts and examiners for testimony. Anybody got the magical answer to that one? I'm all ears, because that's a huge struggle. And there have been some changes and decisions here in Texas recently that just make it all that much more dangerous for the analysts. And I think something that I know I have spent in a lot of different venues trying to get others looking in on forensics to understand that our analysts and examiners take a huge personal risk every time they get on the stand. I'm not sure people quite broadly understand in forensics, there's no such thing as qualified immunity for a forensic examiner. They blow it on the stand, they're cooked, they're done. That's the end of their career. And that's a huge, huge consequence for them. You got
Thanks, Peter.
Sticking a hand up there. She.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to
Erin.
mention too that we are addressing the testimony aspect in the reporting standard at ISO. And that was actually a really contentious debate of whether or not we wanted to include that, in part because, Peter, as you mentioned, certain countries don't have juries and the scientists are not actually providing the testimony. It's like an attorney that's buffering. And so those nations actually include those attorneys in our group, our technical committee, to participate in that. So they're weighing in on it. But it was really important to the US, so much so that we pretty much drafted the whole chunk that was going to go into the standard and had people edit it from there.
I'm a little, my hunch, and this is, Peter's hunchometer, but my hunch is we are just barely starting to see the implications of Brady. And here in Texas, we call it the Michael Morton Act, which is Brady kind of expanded at the state level, of just really what the implications of that are going to be for analysts and testimony. And I don't think you can talk about testimonial standards without basically Brady implications of it. Lots of nodding heads there. Yeah, we're all looking at this going, yeah, I don't know what the answer is yet.
Exactly. Eva, this next question is for you. It's from an agency that has contemplated making technical leads part of their quality division. Has that worked for you, and how did you make those changes to allow that to happen?
We were very fortunate enough to have our structure such that we had technical leaders in place already. The difference is, when we restructured to a crime laboratory bureau, we definitely used those subject matter technical experts, and we eventually brought them together. However, we did a needs assessment, and we did find that in bringing them together in the manner for which we did with the crime laboratory bureau, we found that we needed a better structure with our quality system. We were utilizing our technical leaders as part of our quality system, as a part of the Crime Laboratory Bureau. And with our division restructuring, our leadership saw fit to utilize what we had done with the Crime Laboratory Bureau, bringing those technical leaders together to strengthen that coming together such that they could work together and bring information not only to their own disciplines, but to one another to strengthen them in that quality process. So we were established with technical leaders, but bringing them together, we saw that team approach coming together made us stronger in quality.
Thank you. And these next two questions are separate, but they go slightly hand in hand. The first would be for Erin. You mentioned that forensic science service providers can self-declare. What does that mean?
So basically, the accreditation programs are not requiring, right now at least, are not requiring the OSAC standards to be part of the overall scope of accreditation. But the OSAC, and this can probably be answered better by Ray, is affording the opportunity for people to self-declare. So you're doing all these evaluations that everyone has been discussing today, and you are attesting to meeting the standards that, or in full or in partial. And that's what I would probably define as self-declaration.
Yeah, I could probably, just building on what Erin said, we began first with 2 surveys in 2021 and 22. But there's always been the opportunity for labs to self-declare. We also do outreach sessions as at the FSSB, or Forensic Science Standards Board, overseeing the OSAC. And we reached out and spoke to the standards, essentially the accreditation bodies, as well as the proficiency test providers and so forth. And part of the culmination of those discussions is really up to the crime labs themselves and the bodies that oversee them, if you have a commission like Texas or New York, to prescribe what what standards crime labs are going to adhere to. Otherwise, it's entirely up to the crime lab to make those decisions. And it makes sense that we want crime labs to be implementers, to self-declare, to say, here are the standards that apply to us, and we are implementing them. So at this point, we're really in a state of flux where many labs that are accredited, you're naturally accredited to the overarching standards, the ones that have been there for years. And as the standards populate the registry and become available, people are then implementing them. So we're really kind of in that process of overarching standards now, and then moving towards the much more discipline-specific standards.
Thanks, Ray. I'm going to stay with you for a minute for something that one of the listeners had, and it kind of parlays from that. There's been a conversation of full or partial implementation. Can you explain what that means? And is there any discussion of, are more labs becoming full or partial?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first step we'd like kind of all labs to do is to begin to become an implementer. And it would make sense that, how do you start? And I'm going back to my 10K. Do you begin by being able to run the 10K or the 5K or the 10K? Probably not. If you look at how complex many of these standards are, odds are that many already accredited labs to larger overarching standards will have many of the things in place, but they're also not going to have everything. And there's going to be things that are going to take a while, as some of our presenters indicated, depending on the resources that are needed. We're all very busy. We have backlogs. You have to then, everything you're spending on something else that isn't casework comes away from casework. So even to apply to standards, even though it's a very worthwhile endeavor, it takes resources to do. But the sooner you get started, the sooner you can start to apply that and get to the finish line. And many of us have multiple standards to apply. So the way I look at it, this is an ongoing improvement process. And the irony is, as soon as you get to that finish line, every 5 years, a new version will be coming out and the bar will increase again. So for me, the way I look at it is, I almost commit that we will always be an implementer and not ever fully implemented. It's like, as soon as you get over that hill, there'll be another hill in the distance. But to me, that's part of getting better. I would like to think our crime labs are far better than they were 5 years ago, better than they were last year. In another year and 5 years will be even better than that. So the sooner we get labs going, the sooner we, get closer and closer. But I also respect that, is our job ever done? Quality is an ongoing commitment, something that we are always bringing new technology. So I don't know that if we ever get to that point where we're fully implemented, just wait for another 6 months and there'll be something coming out where you'll have to be working on it again. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. That of course reminds me yet again that I have not worked out today or yesterday. So Rita, this next question then is for you. What is the value of performing a full quantitation on drug-facilitated sexual assault drugs?
Well, those are going to be more of a qualitative validation for those, because we're just looking for the limited, make sure we can reach those minimum limit of detections. For the postmortem and the DUI standards, however, we will have to full quantitative revalidations, because then you're looking at reporting actual quantitative values as opposed to reporting presence or absence.
Great. And this next question would be for yourself, Rita, or Eva, or Ray. What processes does your agency have in place when changes are made to OSAC documents that are published, and your agency has already implemented them?
I'll take it. We're going to go through the same process when a new document comes out. We're going to do the same gap analysis. We're going to compare it to the previous document, and we're going to find out why it changed. Was there some science that made it change, or was what was the justification of the changes for the new document? And then ultimately, if it's on the registry, we're going to try to implement it. Now, another question that I saw in the comments that is similar was, what happens when the SDO publishes a new version and OSAC hasn't adopted that yet? And that's something we're kind of struggling with right now, that there's, is there an ASTM or a ASB document on the registry, but the SDO has now published a new version of that has substantive changes. Which one do you comply with? And we're following that same process. We're doing that analysis. What's the difference between the two? What was the purpose of the difference, if you can figure that out? And what's the impact of that difference? And ultimately, which document we're going to adopt is really going to depend on the answer to those questions. If there was some study that led to determining that what was in the original document, it wasn't as valid or as don't know what word I'm looking for, but you know where I'm going with this, then we may actually end up going with the SDO published standard. Like Grace said, it's a continuous process of improvement, and the timing's going to be off for a while as they go through the different processes, and you just have to evaluate what's the best course.
Yes, and here in Wisconsin, we perform our internal audits annually, and with that process, we created checklists that aligned with the OSAC standards. Of course, now OSAC has the wonderful tools that we can utilize, such that on an annual basis, we are looking at these standards and making sure that we are consistent with any changes that might occur, and implementing or making any updates that we need in order to remain compliant.
So if I could maybe just build on what Rita and Eva both said, I think one of our better moves was trying to make sure that all of our staff are engaged in the process so that they can see these new standards as they're even becoming proposed standards, make public comments and get engaged. And what we want to see is those improvements happening because they see it as better science before it actually even becomes a standard, making those choices, becoming conversant. And I'd rather it be that we're making the changes because it's the right thing to do than necessarily we're ticking a box on an audit. So the idea that if we're not particularly perfectly in line with the standard, but our folks can articulate it, and then we can consider what those new things are coming in. And that's part of why I'm a big advocate for seeing the proposed standards before they become a standard. So you get our folks engaged in it, conversant in why we are or are not doing certain things, make good arguments for resources. And I loop back to it's about continuous improvement, but I love the idea of getting our folks engaged in the process so that they can be commenting and seeing adopting things before they even become a standard, because it's a better practice.
Jody?
Thank you for that. That was for that addition. I really do want to emphasize the fact that we do encourage our staff to participate in that process, and I thank you for bringing that out for sure.
Jody?
I'm gonna jump in here real quick. It was something that Ray said that it's been really important to us in our laboratory to be in that proactive side as opposed to a reactive side, and that's encouraging your folks to be participating in OSAC bodies and ASB bodies as well. You can be affiliate members and all of those other things in order to be really on the front end of the standards development process. You're much better armed with understanding how the standard's going to impact your operations, and be able to start advocating for those resources and planning for those resources well in advance of the standard actually make it onto the OSAC registry. So I am a huge proponent of supporting our people being participants in the OSAC or the American Academy or any other SDO process. And I'm on the US tag with Aaron and John, actually, because it's that important. We want to be on the front end of this as opposed to in a reactive situation where you don't have foreknowledge, you don't have experience in reviewing the standards. That commenting part of it is really important. So the more that we can get our people involved in this process, the stronger our organizations are going to be and the better positioned you're going to be able to adopt those standards.
And Teresa, I see your virtual hand.
Yeah, I'm just jumping in on the same thing because I also see there's a Q&A question on, participation in ASB public comment periods. Other than our ASB newsletter, we do try to work with OSAC and get the word out to OSAC and all of the participants in OSAC about our public comment periods. It goes out through the AAFS newsletter. Events like this are how we get the word out to get involved in the ASB. Just because somebody's not a voting member of a consensus body, they can absolutely be involved in public comment and working groups. And so, we really try to work with groups like this to try to get the word out as much as we can. And we appreciate everybody helping us. And we have that asb@aafs.org email. Anyone can send an email there. We'll add them to the newsletter list. You can also check our website all the time, and that's where all the documents are posted for public comment.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time. The list of questions could continue on and on, I am sure. And I wanted to thank all of our presenters again for your insight and your valuable time that you have contributed to this. Once again, if you needed to reach out to one of the presenters, their contact information will be made available at the end. Thank you so much.
Before you leave today's webinar, please participate in our short 5-minute survey. Simply click the checkbox icon directly above the chat to access the audience feedback survey for today's event. Your feedback is critical information that helps us improve our webinars and continue providing the best experience possible. We would greatly appreciate it. Lastly, across the top of the live stream window are links to our social media profiles, including Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. There is also a link to the FTCOE website, the Just Science podcast, and the FTCOE newsletter registration. Like, follow, or subscribe to stay up to date with everything the FTCOE is doing in support of the forensic community. Thank you again for attending, and we hope everyone has a great day.